Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for a dynamic conversation that reflects the many lessons learned and future possibilities following the science fiction of both 2020 and our nation's handling of intersecting crises around climate, police abuse, and COVID-19. My name is Sonja Diaz, and I'm the founding director of the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative. And today we're going to focus on the important work happening in Florida, which is to organize and galvanize diverse communities to transform the future of the Sunshine State. And so for those of you that don't call Florida home, we want to highlight what we're calling the Florida paradox, which we describe as the seemingly contradictory actions taken by the state's electorate in the last elections. So for starters, in 2018, voters elected a Republican governor and U.S. senator, while enfranchising voters with felony records. Governor DeSantis beat his opponent by less than 0.4%, and Senator Rick Scott beat an incumbent Democratic United States Senator by 0.2%. Yet, Floridians, by nearly 30 percentage points, over 2.3 million votes, said, "We want felons to have access to the ballot box." Now, fast forward in 2020. State of Florida went for Donald Trump 2 presidential cycles in a row. In 2016, Trump beat Clinton by 1.2%. And then just this past November, Trump beat Biden in Florida by 3.3%. Yet again, Floridians in 2020 voted by a 22 percentage point margin to increase the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour. And so here we have these seemingly progressive stances around important societal issues that are gaining traction, while still sending candidates with platforms that are in opposite to these reforms, albeit by very slim margins, to the national stage. So with an active base of community organizers who are mobilizing a coalition of diverse voters, the future of Florida is looking very different. So today we're talking to a group of people who are on the ground making these changes happen. And we'll have a dynamic conversation about what they learned in the last election, how their work helped drive wins, and also what this means about the future and equity and justice. So before I make introductions, I'd like to thank our co-host for this event, the University of Florida Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. We're honored to work with them both for this webinar, but also a rapid response oral history project on the attitudes of Latinx Floridians in 2020. So getting started for this conversation today, we will have Marquis McKenzie of the Central Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. He's an organizer. Roni Bennett, Executive Director of the South Florida People of Color. Reina Sako, City Commissioner of Gainesville, Florida. And Andrea Mercado, co-director of Florida Rising. We'll start with some questions, and then we're going to integrate your perspectives from the audience. So type in the chat any questions that you have for the speakers. We want this to be very engaging. And we're going to close with some comments from Dr. Paul Ortiz of the University of Florida. So thank you all for joining. This is just the start of a conversation that is very important, not just for Florida, but for national politics at the state level. And so thank you everybody for joining us. I know that it's not always easy to figure out all of this technology, but it's good to see your faces and good to engage with you.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So the first question, and I'll just throw it to the group. Can you all explain the Florida paradox and why Florida is such a unique space in our electoral politics? Like, what are some of the misconceptions and myths that you want to clarify about your home state?
Well, I can start. Not everyone at once. You know, we're the 3rd largest state in the country. 23 million people, 67 counties. You know, I have family from Miami to Jacksonville. Those are very different places. We have a large Latino immigrant population, but that too is very diverse. I think the Cuban American community gets a lot of attention. but there's, you know, we now have more Puerto Ricans, and which are neck and neck in terms of being the largest segment of the Latino population. And then in addition to that, Colombians, Venezuelans, Dominicans, and I'm Peruvian and Argentinian. You know, it's very, very distinct political histories and migration stories. And then, you know, we also have a vibrant Black immigrant community, Bahamian, Haitian, from all over the Caribbean. And you know, and I think in addition to that migration, we also have a ton of internal migration in the United States, what we oftentimes call racial conservatives from the Midwest that are moving into Tampa, St. Petersburg, and the I-4 corridor. So, you know, I think it's a state that's constantly changing and in flux. But one thing I know to be true is that Republicans have controlled the state legislature in Tallahassee. We've had a trifecta for almost 20 years, and they've taken advantage of their political power in Tallahassee to undermine so many of the things that we care about, from teachers' pay to and education, to access to healthcare, to upholding stand your ground laws. You know, this is, you know, the state where we saw the murder of Trayvon Martin, and then, you know, an uprising and an increasing movement calling for racial equity. So I think there are a lot of contradictions and a lot of, you know, I think a lot of stories for us to tell about what makes our state so unique. But like you said, Sonja, in your introduction, we're also the state that came within 30,000 votes of electing the first Black governor in the South. And we're very close, and the right-wing forces are kind of hanging on by their fingernails. And I think it's, you know, one of the reasons history is so important in grounding and understanding of a state that's part of the South, that was part of the Confederacy, that had some of the most lynchings per capita anywhere in the country. And that legacy and that history carries forward till today. And it's why we have, you know, such criminalization and disenfranchisement of returning citizens, and criminalization of communities of color. And, you know, I think there's a lot for us to unpack there, but really excited for the conversation that we're going to be having together today.
Thanks for that, Andrea. You know, as I'm thinking about this, I'm looking at you, Roni, and then you, Marquis, who is driving. So, like, I'm hoping you're safe over there. But, you know, what does this mean for organizing? Because governance is not just about who occupies the White House. 2020 showed us that governance is local electeds deciding who lives and who dies, who has access to a COVID-19 test, and now a vaccine. And so, unfortunately for organizers, you're in this myriad of governance to focus not what I would say on progressive policies, but on policies that are safeguarding our future and ensuring opportunity for everybody. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I guess I will go. Yeah, so that's the thing that we do, right? We try to educate folks on these issues and the disparities and things that's happening, because just like Andrea says, we have folks that's coming from all over, you know, the Caribbean, South America, and they do not understand the history that Andrea was saying about, you know, the lynchings. I mean, this is the South, right? So you have, like, even for me, I moved here several years ago from California. I think more California needs to move here. But one of the things that was, you know, that most people don't realize is that, you know, we have this large Latino community, especially in Miami, and they're not really a marginalized group. They are the majority, and they consider themselves white, which, you know, I notice other Latinos that come here, they're like, oh, wow, I'm white. I didn't know that, you know. So it's a little bit different here. So you know, so you're assuming that you have these people of color, which I assumed, right? But there's a lot of conservative folks here, and a lot of folks that came from countries from chattel slavery. So they don't really, they don't really understand what some of the issues are, and that's one of the things that we try to bring to, to raise that consciousness of that. And just like COVID-19, I mean, we're dying and catching it over 3 times as much as white folks. Now, I don't know how those numbers are for, they say Latinx as well. So I'm assuming, that's white and Black Latinx. But, so those things needs to be raised to folks. And so that's one of the things that we try to do, is to raise the consciousness.
That's helpful. Marquis, I mean, your organization and your work really showcases this conundrum where voters are just by and large supportive of expanding access to the franchise in a jurisdiction that was covered in under the dominion of the U.S. Department of Justice or the federal courts for any changes. And yet you succeeded at the ballot box only to meet reticence from both your state legislature and your state courts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep, and also, so I'm not driving, I'm actually in the back seat, so you have to worry about me crashing. But yeah, we definitely seen that it was another attack on democracy, right? And one of the things that we like to do at Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, we like to think of ways that we can create safer communities. And when legislators come in and they try to discriminate against certain population of people, we feel for our community, especially in the time of pandemic, because a lot of people are out of jobs. Even with the new attack with Senator Jeff Brandes with the $15 minimum wage, again, another blow and another sentence that's going to individuals who already completed their times. We just feel that it's double jeopardy, and there's no way it's safe and creating safer communities, and there's no statistics to prove that taking somebody's rights away or even cutting down their minimum wage is going to stop recidivism. So it's just a lot of confusion. We look at it as a lot of people just scared of power, and they want to hold on to that power, right? One of the things that we realized since we passed Amendment 4 is that we covered the gap. You look at a lot of different presidential races, a lot of these races are only won by 100,000 of votes. Now that Amendment 4 passed, you have thousands of people who are able to vote. We're nonpartisan. We don't care if they vote right. We don't care if they vote left. We just want them to have the opportunity to be able to vote, and we don't want them to be blocked. And most importantly, we don't want anybody to choose between paying their bills or paying for their fines and fees to be able to register to vote. And we just think everybody just deserves a chance to be a part of democracy.
Absolutely. And then I want to bring you in, Commissioner Sako. You are the youngest woman ever elected in your body. You've come, to this position of power in a state that has in many ways identified some people as deserving of opportunity and others not. So tell us about, your movement from community organizing to now elected office and what you hope to participate in and bring to life in terms of transformations around policy.
So one of the things I definitely realized is there's a hunger for change. So even though Florida at large might vote red, at the local level, you have people like me, you have Representative Escamani, you have young, vibrant women and minorities who have radical ideas for change, and people are hungry for those if they are tuned in enough to their local or smaller state house races. So if you get their attention, they'll go, definitely I want that, of course I do, but it's hard to compete during midterms or a presidential year with all the political noise of a larger race. So it's hard to get that foothold from people, but there is definitely, I saw a hunger for new voices, new faces. And so what my advocate background's a little weird, full disclosure, I'm Cuban from Miami. So that gave me a very conservative upbringing in out of being told I am the white passing majority in Miami and growing up with that upbringing. But my household, there are 5 people and 2 of them voted for Bernie. 2 of them voted for Trump, and I won't say who I voted for, but there's that generational divide that there is change coming. And it's not all one, Cubans will always go this way, Puerto Ricans will always go this way. There is a divide, and you have to be boots on the ground engaging with people. And that's one of the things that I worked when I was an advocate, just getting to know people on the ground. What is it that you want in this community that will make all the difference? And when you take care of your community on the ground, that gives a small stronghold. So Gainesville is considered this blue dot in the middle of a red sea, where you have a lot of progressive action being taken, and a lot of people are seeing that. A lot of people come here for our university. A lot of young people then go back home with these wild progressive ideas of, well, my town that I lived in for 4 years made this possible. Why isn't it possible where I go back home, where my parents live? And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do, is I can't be an advocate as much anymore because of a conflict of interest if I start touching things. But one of the things I hope to do through my work as a politician is to show people that it is possible, and that when they go home back to live their adult lives as contributing members of society, that they can go back and say, it is possible to do a lot of these things. I've seen it happen. When I worked as an advocate, I would do things to change. It was a lot like lobbying to a certain extent, without calling it lobbying, that a lot of change was possible from other states, and show it here. And it was only possible because Gainesville already had that foothold of being kind of the last progressive bastion for North Florida, that it was possible to kind of move forward some of these ideas. There was appetite for the ideas. And as you keep, it's a bit of a snowball effect. Once you build on it, a lot more is possible because you've done so many great progressive things that are good for the environment, for minorities, for houseless individuals. You can move forward a lot of policy once you've taken that first step. And so I think showing that that first action was possible will open up a lot more doors for more radical progressive ideas.
So this is really helpful, like this idea of like hunger for change, the intersecting place of the community, the local level to state, to a legislature that has been held by one party for many, many years. So Andrea, you have a new organization. You're focused on community mobilization and organizing. What is the future of Florida from your vantage point? What are you all hoping to achieve?
Well, Florida Rising is a result of the coming together of New Florida Majority and Organized Florida, two organizations that had 10 years of organizing in the state. And, you know, I think Reina's comments to me resonated so much, and your own personal experience, Reina, and your family. Because something that I think people outside of Florida don't understand is that the majority of Latinos did not vote for Donald Trump. Like the vast majority actually didn't. More of them voted for Trump than we would want. And Florida really is the heart of Hispanic conservatism. But you know, it oftentimes is like ignoring the fact that the majority of white men and white women are voting for Trump. And I think for us, like our theory of change is that the new majority already exists. That if you can bring together Latinos, Black folks, young people, people with progressive ideals, like we can assert the, not only like the power, but get the kind of changes that our communities are clamoring for. And, you know, I mean, I think we've made a lot of headway, but there's still further to go. And the right wing continues to try to undermine, right? Like that's why they take away the vote. They're actually right now trying to criminalize protest and pass an anti-protest censorship and repression bill. They're trying to make it so that people that registered to vote by mail last year in record numbers are not able to vote by mail in 2022. Like they're just so obvious about that their goal to hold on to power is to keep people of color from voting, and keep, you know, progressive people from voting and undermine democracy. But I see a future that's very bright, you know, like I see people closing down the Homestead Detention Facility, and I see young people taking to the streets demanding justice and equity, and, you know, people exposing the fact that our state is 40% people of color, but only 13% of vaccines have gone to people of color. And, you know, I mean, I think that there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And the reality is the right-wing infrastructure in our state is massive. And that's oftentimes not talked about when we think about what happened in 2020, is that the Trump campaign, like Republicans were outspending Democrats 2-1 in Spanish. They were making record number of buys in Haitian Creole. Like they're contesting for our communities alliance, and they've been able to peel off some Black and Latino men to be on their side. And we're in a battle for hearts and minds and the future of our communities and the future of the planet. And I believe that in the end we win. But that's going to take a lot of, you know, heart and organizing and a lot of sweat, a lot of hard work. And organizing is fundamentally about being in relationship with people, right? Like knocking on someone's door, talking to your neighbor, trying to help people see that ordinary people can come together and make changes. And when people see that, when they pass Amendment 4, or when they pass $15 minimum wage, like I think it helps unlock that other kinds of wins are possible.
So what's really important here, and thank you, Andrea, for those comments, and I want to bring Roni and Marquis in, is this idea that, you know, no community is a monolith. We often, through media and entertainment, are able to see multifaceted lives of white people. They can be anything and everything. And yet non-white people are seen in this reductive way. And we saw that on election night when Miami-Dade went for Donald Trump. But again, research, including research out of the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, makes clear that by a 2-to-1 margin, Latinos voted for Biden. And so we have these misconceptions. We know that no community is a monolith. We know that there is rich diversity in the Black diaspora. What does that mean on the ground, right? Because it takes work to overcome both anti-Blackness and systemic oppression. So Roni and Marquis, you all are in the battle for the soul of Florida, literally the fundamental right to vote, to participate in the democracy, to be able to access dignity. How does this really unravel itself in your organizing?
Well, for South-Florida people of color, you know, our focus is to try to amplify other organizations. And like you said, we're not a monolith, right? We're not a monolith. That's not my dog. I don't have a dog. Okay. So, you know, we all been socialized the same way, right? So especially folks that's coming from, you know, a different country or whatever, the best thing to do to assimilate into, you know, the American culture is to be anti-Black, right? So, so one of the things we have to do is educate these guys and have this deep dialogue and show these guys that, you know, systemic racism isn't the shark, it's the water. We're all swimming in it. And we got to get people to recognize that, you know, white supremacy does, it's strategic to do this divide and conquer, you know, for the planter class, right? So we have to wake people up with that. And that's kind of what we do. We bring folks, you know, from, you know, New Florida Majority, I got to get the name right. And, you know, other organizations like Paul Ortiz to educate folks, especially on the history, Black history. So folks will know that, and you know, most people say American Black history is American history, but really, you know, American history is Black history. You know, it's based on, I know people are like looking at, but yeah, it's like, you know, we built this country, you know, and the culture is Black. But so those are the things that we need to wake people up on.
Marquis, you want to get in on this?
Definitely. And I also just want to chime in and piggyback. Education is the key, right? And when you talk about that, predominantly being African American, when you talk about the president, when you talk about any voting in particular, the first thing you hear on the ground is that, man, the president can't do nothing for me. I don't believe in the system, right? And most of the times people in those African American communities, they're not talking about local races. Most times they don't even notice of local races, right? So only time they don't see any change, they think all of the change is coming from the presidential race. So when they don't see nothing, you have a group of people that don't believe in the system at all, right? And one of the ways that you get them involved is simply, I think, educating. But I think one of the fun ways that we'd like to do it here at FRC is giving those people an opportunity to organize, right? When we have opportunities for people to be, canvassers. We have opportunities for people to do voter registration, show them that they can make a living by simply going out educating other people and allow them to organize their community, right? Because you can take me and I can go to a community that I'm not completely from and I tell them something and they don't want to hear it. But if you allow an individual in that same community who may to deliver that message to the community, this just goes way definitely different. So we're all about doing leadership development.
Marquis, my friend, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm gonna come right back to you. Can you hear me? Okay. All right.
Okay.
So the key is education. From what Marquis was saying, the key is really thinking about Black history is American history. It built this country. And here we are in the South, in Florida. And yet there was a lot of talk about two other states after November, Georgia and Arizona. And in many ways, there are distinct similarities here. So if you think about what Andrea said, which is that Florida in 2018 almost became the first Southern state to send a Black person to the governor's mansion. And I can't help but think about what would have happened had the Supreme Court not gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We think about Texas and Beto running against Ted Cruz, who wants to go to Mexico with his kids, but doesn't want Mexicans and their kids to come here. And then we also think about, states like Arizona and Florida and Georgia that were covered jurisdictions, could not make changes to their voter rolls, could not make changes to early vote without permission from the federal government. And yet, in 2018, we had this historic class of candidates who were running to transform the South. And then 2020, we see the power of mobilization in Georgia and in Arizona in response to xenophobic and ass-backwards public policy making that either sought to restrict the right to vote, wanted to criminalize immigrants, didn't want in-state tuition, you name it. Talk to me, Reina and Andrea, where you see Florida in this conversation with these other states where a lot of the stuff that came out of Donald Trump's White House unfortunately started in 1990s in California and then replicated across the country in places like Arizona, Georgia, and now Florida. What does this mean?
Well, I'm going to start on a high note. It means there's hope. It means beyond everything else, it means that there is hope, regardless of how you try to gut the voting system, how you try to currently, you mentioned the trying to limit vote by mail. No matter what you try to do, I think if there's, as Marquis said, mobilizing on the ground, showing people like this is why it needs to matter to you. This is why your state house will matter. This is why your local election will matter. This is why these candidates will matter to you. I think that there's hope to get people to the ballot one way or the other. I know that there are people that their way of organizing is, do you need me to drive you to the poll? I will do that. Do you need me to drop off your ballot? While it's still legal to do that, I will drop off your ballot for you. Do you need me to help do registration at your church after the service? I will go with all the clipboards and I will do it. There is, I think with that hunger I mentioned in organizing, there is a way to combat whatever systemic failures of voting they try to throw at us. And I think Georgia proved that. I think Arizona proved that. And I think in parts of Texas, as they were trying to shut down polling places, they proved that they were still going to go out in record numbers and vote. And I think that's really the main lesson of 2020, that despite all the hurdles they threw in front of it, people went out to vote because they were galvanized. They knew it was important. And I don't care if I have to wait in line for 12 hours, I'm going to go vote. So there is some of the messaging getting out there where people are realizing more and more, maybe the president doesn't impact my life every day, but damn, he is impacting the country every way, and we are a public embarrassment. So I think that what it shows is, despite whatever they might be throwing forward, there are good organizers on the ground who are mobilizing folks to kind of weave their way through all of these hurdles that are put forward. And you know what? You want to say I have to pay fines to be able to vote after having my rights restored? People set up fundraisers and said, here's the money, now go vote. we're not going to tolerate much of it anymore. If we can't do it through the courts, if we can't do it through the legislative, we will find a way around it one way or the other. Because
in some ways, as we start to reconstruct a government and systems that work for everybody, I want to get Andrea in here because I know that you have to bounce. So give us, your final thoughts. I know that you're hungry for change. I know that we have other states that are transforming national politics. What's the call for Florida? What are people misunderstanding, and what are you going to prove about Floridians working together to really transform not just Gainesville, Miami, Orlando, but DC?
Well, I think that to me, the biggest message coming out of the last election is that we need to continue organizing, that it's possible, that if at a place like Georgia, we can affect change, in Arizona, it can happen here. And we need to organize in every community, in every corner of the state. And there's so many organizations that are building people's institutions and social movements. We invite you to join Florida Rising and be a part of building an organization that's going to serve the people and bring together Black and Brown communities without flattening our differences, acknowledging our differences and our diversity, but with a determination to seize power for our people, with a determination to win the kind of futures that our children deserve. So I'm really feeling hopeful that we will be able to do what is necessary in 2022 for us, not just to survive, but for all of us and our families and communities to be able to really thrive.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. We'll stay in touch, continue to support your leadership, and appreciate you joining us for this dynamic conversation. I'm bringing in some questions from the audience. So if anything, you want clarification, something is really bugging you and you want to hear Reina's answer, Roni's answer, Marquis's answer, type in the chat. So Reina, I'm gonna hand this off to you, and then I'd also love to hear Roni and Marquis's hot take on this. Do Latinx residents feel represented by their elected officials in Florida?
Oof. I would say yes and no. That's the lawyer answer. Yes and no. It depends. When I was growing up, my parents would always say, terrible example, but my parents would always say, look at Marco Rubio, look how far Cuban Americans have gotten in 2-3 generations, where historically immigrants are not very welcome, and it takes multiple generations to get a toehold anywhere in society. So I would say some feel represented. And then I would say on the flip side, because I've worked with immigrant communities, they feel completely alienated and saying we're not a monolith. You can't point to one Cuban American, very distant, watered down Cuban American, and say, look, Latinx people have made it. And that's generally how I feel. I don't feel that he represents my values, even though we may, theoretically have more in common than I do with some of the clients I had when I worked in immigration. So a lot of folks, there's growth in it. And I know that we are getting more and more representation every year, but that representation, coming out of Florida, it's going to be a Cuban American. Does that really represent the entire state when you have so many Puerto Ricans, when you have Brazilians, when you have Dominicans and Venezuelans who are now coming in? Does that really represent the diversity of Florida? No. So I think there is room for growth for a different diversity. I think there's definitely room for more diversity at our state house, which is where I'd like to see some of that growth, because it's not just one senator, it's representing the entire state, but it ends up being old white men. I think Orlando and the greater Orange County area is doing a lot of good work having a variety of minorities represent. But that's the model I would point to. It's showing there is representation, there is more growth and proper representation of all the minorities, not just saying Florida belongs to Cubans, because that's far from the truth and not a proper representation.
Roni, I see you shaking your head. You want to chime in?
I think she's right on. What I can just add to that is that, we need more than representation, right? I mean, when you talk about diversity, it's not just, ethnicity or because, they do that as far as Black folks are concerned as well. It's also your, your affiliation. I mean, if you're conservative, then, so a lot of folks just kind of put these people in place. They're still, focusing on, peddling white supremacy, right? They're, and so they really don't do much for the community, the community that you think they're doing. So, so representation is great, but it takes more than just that, so I agree with Reina, and yeah, especially when it comes to the Latinx, because everybody thinks it's Cuban.
Right. So here's another question from the audience. Do Haitian and Jamaican communities in Florida vote as a political bloc?
Okay, so my family's Jamaican, so that would be a no. Again, it's not a monolith again, right? But I will say it could be different depending on, you remember now, immigration story is different from African American, what's happened here, right? So most of the folks that's coming over probably have a lot more privilege, maybe. I don't want to generalize, because I know someone's gonna put something in the chat. So yeah, a lot of folks coming from the Caribbean, they have a different perspective, because think about it, they've come to where there's more Black folks in that country as opposed to the African American. So there's a lot of colorism, folks thinking, they're better, or, and that's, I think that's also in the Latinx community as well. So yeah, so that long answer is no, they're not.
And this is part of organizing, right? It's recognizing the distinct differences, but then also the areas of commonalities. And so part of that is allowing people to be their full cultural selves as we seek forward to have an inclusive democracy. So another question from the chat is, can we talk, I'm going to shift a little bit to both suppression, but misinformation and disinformation, which was widely reported on in Florida in Black communities, but also in Latinx communities. So a volunteer noted that she spoke with a lot of Puerto Ricans who expressed that they couldn't vote. What's being done to enfranchise Puerto Rican voters, and how are they targeted for voter misinformation, voter suppression in the last election?
Yeah, welcome to the crowd. I'll let Marquis.
Roni.
Because isn't that the issue, voter suppression? I mean, that's the focus, I don't really think, they do it to, Black folks, Latinx, just people of color. Again, it's to keep that power, right? And so, yeah, so I do have a problem with, I'm an independent, but I have a problem with, if you look at, the Democrats, I don't think they do enough, but, maybe I just don't know what they're doing. So I need to be careful with that. Because why, we know this has been happening since what, like 1865, and the same thing's happening. So what are we doing? Maybe Reina could tell me what I'm assuming.
So I know firsthand, one of the things we did, the Hispanic caucus was really organizing around, we'll have cultural events. Do we go and register folks there? And it can be, it's not a pushy way of like, have you voted? Do you want to vote, kid? It was more of a, elections are coming up. Have you registered to vote? And if someone said, I can't vote, ask them, why do you think you can't vote? Is there a reason? And sometimes people were saying, oh, I'm a felon. I don't have my rights. And we're like, actually, have your rights back. Or I'm Puerto Rican. And they're like, actually, if you're registered here on the mainland, you can certainly vote. Right. Or we've had a lot of students saying, like, I can't vote because I live here, but I'm registered back home. And we're like, you can actually change your voter registration right now. Like, here you go vote at the student center. I think it's a matter of just asking everyone. And it goes back to that boots on the ground, like knocking on every door, asking every individual, because it's a matter of individuals. And everybody's going to have a different idea of why they can't vote because they've heard something, they've read something. And I think that's a matter of mass misinformation, because the internet is wide and varied and at the same time so tailored down to what you want to see that you might be in an echo chamber and you've never heard anything different. You might not have heard that recently released persons can vote, that Puerto Ricans can vote, that you can vote at your school when you're away from it. because you just haven't been around that kind of information. But if groups like the Hispanic Caucus were doing here, and I think it was more of a local movement to go out at events. If they're having a Hispanic cultural arts event, you have 12 people with clipboards saying like, hey, have you voted? Hey, are you registered to vote? Very politely just asking and leaving folks with that information. I think that's the simplest step you can take if 10 people with clipboards go out to a cultural event where you know a large minority is going to gather. You go out and beat misinformation with a smile and a clipboard.
And in some ways, you know, we see that happening for some parties that want to invest in getting those votes. Andrea talked about the Republican Party and conservative groups fighting for votes of non-white voters, and it shows. And I think that's something that we can learn from Florida about what happens when you have that meaningful investment. Roni, not to interrupt, but I wanted to kick it over to Marquis because Marquis, like, there is widespread voter suppression across America, absolutely in Florida. You're working on this issue. We're going to go into redistricting, which is likely going to engage in some gerrymandering. What's the plan here? You have all these new voters, these new Floridians that can really change policy. What do you see happening?
So what we're seeing happen is that definitely these individuals want to be involved, right? And instead of just making an assumption like this is what needs to change, we've been hosting like many power sessions where there are educational training where we break down the government system all the way from the state to the local, how the government works and who pressed what button. Because you have a lot of people just going around, may think that commissioner could change something, and then they may say, oh, this commission is not good because she can't even change what we need, not knowing that she's not even the one or he's the one that can even change that issue. So definitely educating them. Not only that, but allowing them to definitely continue to get involved and asking them to get their family and friends involved, because we see that a higher rate of individuals showed up and voted early who stayed in the same household as returning citizens, right? So pushing them to have those extra conversations with their family members and to be able to talk. But the most important is listening. We have a lot of listening sessions to gather the information that what the returning citizens would like to see, and taking that back to our team and putting together one of our most progressive platforms I say we ever put together, that it can address all of the needs across returning citizens, whether you're Republican or Democrat. Those issues are the same if you have a felony conviction, right? We talk about housing, for instance. I've been out of incarceration for 15 years, and I still can't put my name on a rental application just because of that, right? And that's one of the biggest things that we see across the state of Florida. Then we talk about juveniles, right? The state of Florida sent more juveniles to adult prison than any other state. So we try to connect these issues where they're most hurting our communities, and most, again, allowing these individuals to tell their stories. And that's how we win the hearts over. Sometimes most politicians allow people to tell their real life stories. And we get them to go against their own self-interest sometimes when they see that this is just a human that who have made a mistake, and it could simply be me, and it could simply be my family member as well. We try to connect those real life issues to what's going on in the community.
Thanks for that, Marquis. Another question from the audience, and Reina, in a sense, you mentioned this with Orlando, but I also want to hear from you, Roni, being in Miami, and the flip in some of the House races that happened in 2020. What cities and counties in Florida have the best opportunities to flip from red to blue at the local level? And I'll just add another dimension, because as much as this is tied to partisan politics, it's not. It's about who is going to promulgate policies that allow opportunity and dignity for all. So, you know, what are some of the hot spots that are really showing this manifestation, this flip, this sea change in Florida?
So I guess I can talk a little bit, because, you know, I am a nonprofit, so we tend to talk about issues more so than, you know, the tactics. But, you know, Miami-Dade is blue, right? Miami-Dade is blue. And, you know, we just have a few of those Cubans that, you know, but other than, I mean, but it's what Andrea was saying. It really, you know, this is perception. And so, you know, it went blue. You know, some of the areas that, if I look at, you know, if I look at Broward seems to be very blue. So, you know, if I look at South Florida, that's not really a problem. If I remember your question, I don't remember the question, but you know, so I just think it's because of, you know, what happened last year with Trump, and, you know, he's living here now, and, you know, the Hispanic, you know, community is very vocal on that, but I don't really think it's really, you know, I mean, they're just much louder. Let me put it that way.
Commissioner Sako, what are you seeing, you know, amongst the caucus and other legislators? Where are you seeing changes?
So I will say definitely South Florida. And to go back to the Miami-Dade example, it might have gone for Trump, but it also elected a Democratic mayor for the county.
That's
so
right.
on the same ballot, they went two different ways.
And this is the
I would say,
of the ballot. Yeah.
I would say every county has an opportunity.
First woman too, first woman of Miami-Dade mayor.
So I would argue every county, maybe not the ones surrounding me, they are all deeply entrenched. And it's, I think you said the buzzword earlier, gerrymandering. So we had really good candidates for District 3 in Congress, and Alachua County went decidedly blue, and the other counties that we share that seat with went far right, and it's just because of how we're carved out. So I think redistricting might help, might hurt, but it has the potential to help get a more accurate picture of where people live. And so I think the greater Orlando area has an influx of immigrants. Even Tampa has a potential. I think places that have universities, if you get students to vote, if you get young people who are going to inherit this massive mess of problems that previous generations have made, if you get young people to vote, they are overwhelmingly thinking of their future, of climate change, of human rights issues. Overwhelming. Not to say that there aren't people who aren't and are far conservative and don't care, but the vast majority of those young people are going to be well educated, are going to be progressively minded, and they want to vote. They just maybe don't think that they can vote there. And they can flip or keep very blue those regions. That might be enough to bring new people to the state house or even Congress if they are registered. So I would definitely say any place with a major institution has the potential to flip and stay blue.
Awesome. I'm going to do one last question from the audience, then rapid response, then bring Dr. Ortiz in. So in terms of the last question, Marquis, this is for you. Like, civic engagement is not just the ballot box. It's not just casting the ballot. And you know this intimately because there are people that are just permitted because of their status, their citizenship, you name it, who cannot engage in that, yet they are civically engaged. And so can you talk about what your strategy is for an off-election year before we go into midterms next year? What does civic engagement amongst your constituency look like, and how are you building community during the pandemic?
Definitely. Okay, so one of the ways that we're definitely building community during the pandemic right now, and I'm actually on the road right now currently, we have 11 chapters that we have across the state, and our goal this year is to double that. But each one of those chapters, we just took them 2,000 PPE gear, gloves, sanitizer, and masks that they can participate in local food drives that's happening in their communities to make sure those communities have safe PPE and be protected at all times, right? And when you talk about civic engagement, one of the things that we did last year, and I'm definitely going to do it again, we actually went out and adopted a precinct just to show returning citizens, like you have your vote, you can vote now, but let's see how it actually works to see how the election goes, how to cast a vote, or how to check somebody's information when they can't vote, because a lot of us get discriminated against when we go to some polls. So we want to make sure that we know how to educate ourselves. So we're looking to do the same thing, not just sign somebody up to register to vote, but teach them how the polls works themselves. So giving them the opportunity to go through voter protection, election work, to see how it feels, and definitely keeping them engaged. And then lastly, I would say is that in the state of Florida, youth can get pre-registered at the age of 16. So why not? We're not having conversation with those youth. So by the time when a big election come up, those are youth that we already engaged. We kind of know which way they're going to vote and how they're going to vote towards issues because we've been engaging them for a very while. So definitely getting the youth involved and allowing them to learn how to organize. Most of the youth, if you think about it, they have progression ways and they want to see things change from experiences that they have went through. A lot of kids go through different type of trauma, and when you look at that, that's a lot of issues that we're facing in our community. They can help push the change. And it's strategically say, it's known that if you have a child go out, knock on somebody's door, that voter is likely is going to go out and vote versus an adult knocking on the door. So allow the youth to lead more initiatives instead of thinking that we could limit them a lot. So that's what we've been doing.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, rapid fire, and then we're going to go to Dr. Ortiz. Roni, what are you hungry for in Florida? What change are you hungry for?
Wow. You know, yeah, so what I would love is that, you know, we can unite all of our folks, because that's kind of what we do. We bring folks together from all across the region. That's what samples out. And also,
Thanks for that. I know we're having a little sound here, so Marquis, I'm gonna give it to you. Marquis, what state do you want to follow Florida's lead? Oh, now you're muted.
Now he's muted.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I would say the state that I want to see follow Florida lead, and I think they somewhat already did, is Virginia.
Virginia. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Virginia.
Awesome. Okay, Commissioner Sako, what do you want to say to all the other women of color who want to run for local office?
Ooh, you can do it. So first and foremost, you can do it. I came to this, I left my home country on a boat when I was 4, and I was kept in Guantanamo Bay in a refugee camp in Panama because they didn't want to let the immigrants in. And here I am in my office today talking to everyone. You can definitely do it. There is no shortage of opportunities for women and women of color who are hungry for change and want to help their communities. And if that's what you want to do, you'll find a way to do it.
Awesome. And Roni, I'm going to kick it back to you because the sound was funny. So tell us again what you're hungry for.
Yeah, well, of course, you know, Florida, we need to turn it blue, right? So we'd love to kick out DeSantis because, you know, he's Trump Jr. And yeah, and also all of the senators as well, you know. So again, South Florida people of color, what we try to do is bring, you know, folks from across the racial, ethnic, and cultural divide to unite. And the only way we're going to get stuff is to organize. That's the only way we've ever gotten anything done. So we have to unite and organize. So that's my hope.
Thank you, Commissioner Sako. Thank you, Roni. Thank you, Marquis. I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Ortiz for closing. And I want to say we had such a dynamic and engaged audience. They were just typing all of these awesome questions. So there is a hunger and appetite for this dialogue.
Well, thank you, Sonia. And on behalf of the University of Florida, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, we're just so honored to be in a coalition and relationship, a research partnership with our dear colleagues at UCLA. You know, when I put on my history professor's hat, what I've heard today is really, I'm hearing 3 words: organize, organize, and organize. I'm hearing solidarity. I'm hearing these amazing immigration and origin stories. I think what we've heard also is that to understand a state like Florida, we have to understand the tremendous diversity within the groups we're talking about. Yes. As Roni has mentioned, within what we see from the outside is the African American community, we have to understand there's tremendous diversities within those neighborhoods, within those institutions. Commissioner Sako has also talked to us about diversities within different Latinx communities and populations, and also the issues of gender and sexuality. We haven't talked about quite as much, but are very important and of desperate importance, I would argue, in terms of thinking about political enfranchisement in the Deep South. You know, taking even a further step back, thinking about the period of Reconstruction in Florida, there's so many continuities here. We've been talking about voter suppression, the right to vote, the right of representation. One of the exciting things that I as a historian, I get as a takeaway, and I really want to encourage folks to contact the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at UF. We want to hear your story. And the more stories we hear, I think the more complexity, Sony, that we can kind of add to the story. But one of the amazing parts of Florida history that most people don't understand relates again to the themes that all of the panelists today have accentuated. And that theme is that when one part of our community makes an advance, all of us benefit from it. This is so different than the kind of society I was raised in, where you heard often, well, if this group gets something, Paul, your community is going to lose. That's what I would call the zero-sum game of citizenship, that Americans are tempted, right? That's the power of the Trump movement. It teaches us that if Roni gets more rights, then Paul loses rights, okay? So all of you as organizers have been teaching us today that a rising boat lifts, what's that? A rising tide lifts all, I guess as a Floridian, I should know that, right? And let me give you the final historical case study. During Reconstruction, when African Americans won the right to vote after fighting in this bloody Civil War, after centuries of slavery, during Reconstruction in Florida, a law was passed in 1868 called Declarant Alien Voting. This meant that Cuban people who were fleeing this incredible war of liberation against the Spanish Empire, Cuban workers who stepped foot in Key West or Tampa could immediately win the right to vote. All they had to do was sign a slip that said, I pledge to become a naturalized citizen. That meant brand new immigrants to the South became registered voters. Mm-hmm. And this created these incredible Black and brown alliances in Florida in the 1860s, 1870s that helped create our first public education system in the state. We didn't have a public education system, brothers and sisters, during slavery time. Education was only for the sons and daughters of the master or the mistress. Right. And so those Black and brown alliances were so key to any forward advances we made. But since that time, I'm afraid we've been brainwashed, or we've been, Dr. King called a cultural homicide, where the advances of African Americans especially are erased from history. So I'm just so excited to see a return of this idea of solidarity, of mutual aid, of supporting each other's struggles, of really being there for each other. I think as a historian, the Black Lives Matter movement has made my job a lot easier, because it's created all throughout the country a new passion and desire to learn about our separate struggles are really one, all throughout the United States, all throughout the Americas. I'm so thrilled as a Chicano or Mexican American born in '64 to be doing anti-racist workshops in cities like Chicago or Miami or Los Angeles or New York, especially with Latino or Chicano or Hispanic organizations. Roni's wonderful organization, South Florida People of Color, invited me down a few years ago, and that opened a door for me to do work with other groups like, say, in Hialeah and other parts of South Florida. Again, especially with Hispanic organizations who are trying to deal with anti-Black racism within their or our communities. And we're beginning to realize that anti-Black racism in our communities is holding us back. It's holding all of us back. Mm-hmm. So in conclusion, I'll put my oral historian's cap back on and say, if you're watching and you're interested in these issues, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program really wants to hear your story. We're just so excited and thrilled again to be working with UCLA with the Latino Policy and Politics Initiative. This is an ongoing project, and so I'm so excited. This is just our first program. Imagine where we'll be 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line, right? So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks to everybody in the audience, our speakers, and I'm just listening to you, Paul, is always so wonderful because so often we just go back to the 1960s, and in many ways it's erroneous. It really is going back to Reconstruction and the radical reimagination of power. Ultimately, the way that I see our path forward is if we go to a Reconstruction or we go to a war on poverty, we are working and organizing to create the circumstances so that it's actually viable and not dead on arrival in a time of economic peril or a global pandemic. And that's our opportunity there. So for all of you, including those on the West Coast that have never been to Florida, welcome to really the heroes and the leaders that are going to shape this country for generations to come, because it starts with people who are young, it starts with education, and it starts with collaboration. And so very thrilled to have engaged. Stay safe, everybody. Take care.
Ciao.